The Galactic Council chamber floated in the void between stars. A massive structure of crystalline metals and shielded viewports that had witnessed 3,000 years of careful diplomacy and controlled conflicts. Ambassador Victoria Chen stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species. Her dark suit, a stark contrast to the flowing robes and adaptive garments worn by the alien delegates surrounding Hershey, was alone not physically. As to human aides flanked her position, but politically and strategically she stood. Without allies in this ancient hall where humanity had been the newest members for 47 years, Vrin's sovereignty had taken 3 human colony worlds in the Outer Traverse sector over the past 2 months, following all proper galactic protocols for territorial expansion. Through limited warfare first, they had broadcast their intentions across all official channels, giving the human colonists 30 standard days to evacuate. Then they had engaged the small human defense fleet in what the galaxy considered a proper battle. Ships announced their positions. Weapons were discharged from acceptable ranges. And when human casualties reached the agreed threshold of 2,000 military personnel, the human forces had withdrawn as expected. The Vrin had then occupied the worlds, installed their own governors, and filed the appropriate annexation documents with the Council by Galactic standards. Everything had proceeded correctly. The human colonies had been in disputed territory. The Vrin had followed every rule of civilized conquest, and now humanity was expected to either accept the loss or engage in a counteroffensive under the same restrictive protocols. Ked requested this emergency session not to protest the annexation, but to invoke an article of galactic law so ancient that most species had forgotten it. Existed Counselor Veroth of the Vrin stepped forward. His 6 legs carrying his bulk across the polished floor with practiced grace, his translator rendered his clicking speech into flat, emotionless words. The human delegation arrives with what complaint? We wonder, Vroth said, his tone carrying barely concealed amusement. Your colonies were in territory we have claimed for generations. Your military forces engaged in proper combat and withdrew when casualty limits were reached. And our occupation follows all council mandates? Chen did not smile. She did not show anger. Her face remained a mask of professional calm as she raised one hand, and the holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered to life. I invoke Article 7 of the Founding Accords, Chen said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without need for technological amplification. I hereby declare that the Vrin sovereignty has committed acts of war against the United Nations of Earth. In her colonial territories, a murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Counselor Veroth's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Acts of war, he repeated, Human Ambassador. We are already at war, conducted according to all proper civilized limitations. That is not what I said. Chen replied, I invoke Article 7, which permits any member species to declare unrestricted warfare against an aggressor. The chamber fell silent. Even the translation systems seemed to pause. As if uncertain they had processed her words correctly, High Counselor Mathras of the Quellan people rose from her seat, her crystalline form refracting the light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Ambassador Chin, Mathras began, her voice carrying the weight of her 800 years of service to the Council. Article 7 has not been invoked in over 800 standard years. The protocols of limited warfare were established specifically to prevent the total conflicts that once devastated our civilizations. Why would humanity reject these protections? Chen turned to face the High Counselor. Directly because the Vrin sovereignty has taken our worlds and our people, she said, because they believe humanity will simply accept this loss or engage in another ritualized battle that costs us more lives and territory while they continue their expansion, and because we choose not to play by rules designed to favor established powers over newer members of this. Council Veroth stepped closer, his body language radiating confidence. The human delegation speaks as if they have some hidden strength. He said, Your fleet is smaller than ours. Your technology is comparable but not superior. And your tactical doctrine follows the same patterns we have observed from all species. You may invoke ancient articles if you wish, but the reality of military capacity does not change. Chen finally smiled. but there was no warmth in it. You are correct on one point. Counselor Varath, she said, reality does not change. But perception certainly does, she gestured. And the holographic display shifted to show fleet movements, population statistics, and industrial capacity for 47 years. Humanity has been a model member of the Galactic Council. Chen continued, we have followed every protocol, observed every limitation, and conducted ourselves with what you might call excessive politeness. We have fought exactly 3 limited conflicts in our time as council members, and in each case we adhered perfectly to civilized warfare conventions. We announced our fleet movements. We respected casualty thresholds. We negotiated fairly when we lost, and graciously when we won. And because of this, you have made assumptions about what humanity is capable of. Mathras leaned forward, her crystalline eyes focusing intently on the human ambassador. What are you suggesting? Ambassador, I am suggesting, Chen said, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried more menace than any shout. That you have only seen us playing by your rules when we joined the council. We studied your conflicts, your histories, your concepts of warfare. We found them quaint, charming, even like watching children play at soldiers with wooden swords. Vratha's legs scraped against the floor, his body language shifting to something more aggressive. The human speaks insults now. He said, perhaps your species is not as civilized as you pretend civilized, Chen repeated, as if tasting the word the Varin. Sovereignty massacred 17 million of your own people in the Purging Wars 6,000 years ago. The Vexian Compact engineered a plague that killed billions on 4 neighboring worlds. The Korvathi Union practices ritual cannibalism of defeated enemies, and you lecture us on civilization. She turned back to address the full council. Humanity has been at war with itself. For our entire recorded history, Chen said, we have fought with sticks and stones, with bronze and iron, with chemical weapons and nuclear fire. We have destroyed entire cities in single moments. We have turned our own planet's atmosphere into a weapon. We have fought in our oceans, on our land, in our skies, and in the void of space before we ever met you. And when we joined the Galactic Council, we made a choice. We chose to follow your rules, to fight your limited wars, to pretend that conflict could be civilized, but that was a choice. Counselor Varath, not a limitation. The chamber remained silent. Delegates exchanging uncertain glances. The Vrin's sovereignty has now forced us to make a different choice. Chen continued, you have taken our worlds, killed our people, and believed we would simply accept it or engage in another polite, limited conflict. You were wrong. She turned back to Vareth, meeting his compound eyes without flinching. I have invoked Article 7. She said, unrestricted warfare, no casualty thresholds. No announced fleet movements, no prohibited weapons or tactics, just war. Conducted the way humanity has always known it, total absolute. And without mercy until one side surrenders unconditionally. Vraith's mandibles clicked rapidly. A sign of agitation. You threaten us with ancient laws and bold words. He said, but threats are not victories. Your fleet cannot match ours. And bold speeches do not win wars. Chen nodded slowly. You are absolutely right. She said, which is why I am not threatening you. I am warning you. She raised her hand again, and the holographic display changed to show a single human warship, sleek and deadly, hanging in space. This is the UNSS Prometheus, Chen said. She is already in VN space. Her crew has been authorized to engage targets of opportunity using full tactical discretion. No announcements, no warnings, no limitations. Varieth stiffened. Impossible. Said we would have detected any incursion, perhaps. Chen replied, or perhaps you have been detecting merchant vessels, science ships, and diplomatic couriers for 47 years. Never realizing what else they could be, she turned to face the entire council once more. Humanity wishes to maintain peaceful relations with all council members. She said, but we will not be conquered. We will not be bullied. We will not fight with one hand tied behind our backs anymore. The Vrin's sovereignty can withdraw from our territory immediately and pay reparations. Or they can learn what human warfare really looks like. The choice is theirs. Chen tapped a control on her wrist display, and the holographic image shifted one final time. Showing the proud face of a human naval officer, Admiral Torres of the Prometheus sends his regards. Chen said he is awaiting my signal. She looked directly at Vrath. Don't make us show you what we've been holding back. You won't like it. The Vrin's sovereignty did not withdraw. Counselor Vareth had returned to his homeworld convinced that humanity was bluffing, that their threats were empty posturing, designed to avoid another humiliating, limited engagement within 14 standard days. Vrin forces had captured 2 additional human colonies, bringing their total conquests to 5 worlds. The operations had been textbook examples of civilized warfare, advance notice provided, civilians evacuated, defensive forces engaged according to proper protocols. Vin High Command celebrated each victory, streaming the battles across their communication networks for their population. 2 witness military analysts from across the galaxy watched with interest, noting that human resistance seemed weaker than expected. Perhaps the bold words spoken in the council chamber had been nothing more than desperate rhetoric. After Admiral Kresh commanded the Vrin 3rd Battle Group, a formation of 42 warships that represented the cutting edge of Vrin military power. His flagship, the Infinite Sovereignty, bristled with plasma cannons and kinetic accelerators, all designed to engage enemy vessels at the respectable distances mandated by galactic warfare convention. Skrish was a veteran of 6 limited conflicts and had never experienced defeat. He considered the humans an interesting challenge, but hardly a serious threat. His current mission was to hunt down and destroy the human carrier group that had been harassing Vrin supply lines near the Kester Nebula. The human force consisted of 1 carrier and approximately 12 escort vessels, all of which had been broadcasting their position intermittently according to standard protocols. It should have been a straightforward engagement. Trish's force outnumbered and outgunned the humans significantly, and once they closed to proper combat range, the battle would be decided quickly. The 3rd Battle Group entered the Kester Nebula region at full combat readiness, sensors sweeping for the human carrier contact. His sensor officer reported human carrier group bearing 273, distance 400,000 kilometers. They are maneuvering into the asteroid field designated Kester 7. Kresh studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The humans were fleeing into an asteroid field, a predictable defensive maneuver that would provide some cover, but ultimately only delay their inevitable defeat. Pursue. He ordered all ships maintain formation. Weapons to stand by. Broadcast our intention to engage as protocol requires. The Vrin fleet moved forward, following the human ships deeper into the asteroid field. The rocks here were large, some measuring several kilometers across, remnants of a planetary collision. Millions of years earlier, Kresh's formation spread out slightly to navigate the obstacles while maintaining effective firing solutions. Human carrier group is increasing speed. The tactical officer announced they are moving deeper into the field. Let them run, Kresh said. We have them trapped. The asteroid field only extends another 1,000,000 kilometers before open space resumes on the far side. Deploy forward scouts to prevent their escape. For Vrin, destroyers broke formation and accelerated ahead, their mission to cut off the human retreat and force them to turn and fight. Krush watched his display as the destroyers reached the far side of the asteroid field and took up blocking positions. The trap was set perfectly, Admiral, his sensor officer said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. I am detecting unusual readings from several of the larger asteroids. Define unusual. Kresh commanded heat signatures. Electromagnetic emissions, the officer replied, consistent with active power systems. But that would mean the asteroid field exploded into violence. What Kresh had assumed were natural space rocks suddenly revealed themselves to be weapons platforms, missiles, and kinetic impactors that had been carefully positioned and camouflaged over days or weeks. Hundreds of asteroids began moving, not randomly, but with purpose and coordination. Human weapons fire erupted from concealed positions throughout the field, striking Vrin ships from multiple angles simultaneously. There were no announcements, no polite warnings, no opportunity to respond in kind. The Vrin fleet spread out to navigate the asteroids, found itself under attack from all directions at once. Evasive maneuvers. Gresh shouted, "Return fire, all batteries." But there was nowhere to evade to. The asteroids themselves had become weapons. Their trajectories calculated with inhuman precision to intercept Vryn ships regardless of which direction they turned. Kresh watched in horror as three of his cruisers simply disintegrated under the impact of rocks moving at relativistic velocities. The kinetic energy released was staggering, turning warships into expanding clouds of vapor and debris. The humans have weaponized the entire asteroid field, the science officer reported. Voice shaking, they have been here for at least 2 weeks. Installing propulsion systems on selected asteroids and programming attack patterns. This is not civilized warfare. This is an explosion. Cut off the rest of his statement as the science station erupted in sparks and flamed. Infinite sovereignty shuddered under multiple impacts, her shields failing sector by sector under the relentless bombardment. Where is the human carrier? Kresh demanded. Where are their ships? Unknown, Admiral, the sensor officer replied. We are detecting massive interference from all the weapons fire. They could be anywhere in this chaos. As if in answer, the human carrier group emerged from behind a cluster of asteroids less than 50,000 kilometers away. Far closer than any civilized engagement would permit. The human ships did not look like the sleek diplomatic vessels that had visited Vryn ports for decades. These were warships, their hulls bristling with weapons that had been hidden behind false plating and disguised as civilian equipment. The carrier alone mounted railguns that could accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed, and as Kresh watched, those guns opened fire. The range was impossibly close by galactic standards. There was no time to maneuver, no opportunity for the careful dance of long-range combat that defined civilized warfare. The human projectiles crossed the distance in seconds, punching through Vryn shields and armor as if they were not there. All ships, emergency jump. Kresh ordered retreat immediately. But the humans had thought of that. Tusk scattered throughout the asteroid field were devices broadcasting gravitic interference, preventing faster-than-light jumps within a massive radius. The Vryn fleet was trapped in a kill zone with no escape and enemies on all sides. This is Admiral Kresh to all Vryn forces. He transmitted on all channels, abandoning encryption and protocol. In his desperation, we are under attack by human forces using prohibited tactics. They have violated every convention of civilized warfare. Request immediate assistance. The human response came not as a transmission, but as action. More asteroids began to move. These ones aimed not at the Vryn warships, but at the 4 destroyers Kresh had sent to block the retreat. The destroyers tried to evade, their captains finally understanding that this was not a battle they could win through conventional means. That did not matter. The asteroids struck home with mathematical precision, and for more Vryn ships ceased to exist. Kresh stared at his tactical display as it updated with catastrophic losses in less than 20 minutes. His proud 3rd battle group had been reduced to fewer than 15 functional ships. Human carrier group had suffered 0 casualties, sir. We are receiving a transmission, his communications officer reported. Audio only. Human origin. Put it through, Kresh said. Slumping in his command chair, woman's voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect Vryn through the translation. Systems, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the UNSS. Prometheus, the voice said, you are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any ship that attempts to fight will be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to comply. Kresh looked around his shattered bridge at the faces of his crew. They were terrified, and he could not blame them. Everything they had been taught about warfare, about honor, about civilized conflict, had been rendered meaningless in less than an hour. What do we do, Admiral? His executive officer asked quietly. Kresh thought about the proud history of the Vryn military, about the conventions that had kept galactic warfare limited and survivable for 3,000 years. Then he thought about the fact that humans had just demonstrated they had never really been bound by those conventions at all. Comply, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Power down all weapon systems and prepare for boarding. And send a priority transmission to Vryn High Command. Tell them that Ambassador Chen was right. The humans were not bluffing as his remaining ships powered down their weapons. Kresh composed the most important message of his career would reach Vryn space in 3 days. And it would change everything. They do not fight like soldiers, he transmitted. They fight like apex predators. They do not seek honorable combat. They seek total victory through any means necessary. Everything we thought we knew about human warfare was a carefully constructed lie. They have been hiding their true capabilities since the day they joined the Council. We have not been fighting the human military. We have been fighting the version of themselves they chose to show us. That version is gone now. The Galactic Council had protocols for everything, including the observation of military conflicts between member species within days of the Kester Nebula incident. Council observers from neutral species had embedded themselves with both Vryn and human forces. Their role to document the conduct of warfare and ensure compliance with galactic law. Observer Sirth of the Qualathi people had served in this capacity for 200 years. Witnessing 17 different conflicts, he had seen plasma bombardments, kinetic strikes, and even the occasional prohibited weapon. Deployed in desperation, he believed he had witnessed every form of violence that intelligent species could inflict upon one another. The humans proved him wrong within his first week of observations. Had been assigned to the human cruiser Defiant. Operating in the Outer Traverse, near recently captured Vryn territories, the ship's captain, a lean woman named Rodriguez, had welcomed him aboard with professional courtesy and immediately granted him full access to all non-classified systems. That openness should have been reassuring. But Sirth found it deeply unsettling. Species that had nothing to hide rarely volunteered such transparency. We are approaching the Vryn supply depot at Kepler 7. Rodriguez announced to her bridge crew. Intelligence indicates minimal military presence, mostly automated cargo systems and perhaps 50 personnel. Standard raid protocols. Sirth watched as the Defiant decelerated from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Well outside detection range of the Vryn facility in civilized warfare, the humans would now broadcast their intention to attack, giving the Vryn forces time to evacuate non-combatants and prepare defensive positions. Rodriguez did no such thing. Tactical. Deploy reconnaissance drones. She ordered full stealth configuration. I want complete mapping of the facility's defenses, personnel locations, and cargo manifests before we commit. The Defiant released dozens of tiny drones that accelerated toward the Vryn depot on minimal power. Their radar signatures smaller than natural space debrief. For 6 hours, the human ship simply waited in the darkness while the drones collected data. When they returned, the tactical officer displayed a 3-dimensional map of the Vryn facility so detailed that Sirth could identify individual Vryn personnel by their heat signatures. Confirmed. 43 Vryn personnel. All military, the tactical officer reported. Depot contains fuel, ammunition, and spare parts for approximately 1 fleet battle group. Automated defenses include 8 plasma turrets and a basic shield. Generator Rodriguez studied the display with cold calculation. Can we take the depot intact? She asked. Negative. The tactical officer replied. To many defensive systems, we would suffer damage in a direct assault than we do not assault it directly. Rodriguez said. Communications. Broadcast a repeating message on all Vryn frequencies. Inform them that this depot has been designated a military target and will be destroyed in 12 hours. All personnel should evacuate immediately. Sirth felt a moment of relief perhaps. The humans were going to follow proper protocols after all. Then Rodriguez smiled. And that relief evaporated while we broadcast that message. Tactical will prepare the real attack, she continued. We hit them in 4 hours, not 12. Confusion is a weapon. Observers can note that in their reports the attack, when it came, was nothing like the Grand Fleet engagements Sirth had witnessed in other conflicts. The Defiant did not engage the depot's defenses directly. Instead, it launched a spread of missiles that detonated several thousand kilometers away from the facility, releasing clouds of reflective chaff and electromagnetic interference. The depot's automated systems, detecting incoming ordnance, activated their shields and defensive turrets while those systems were focused on the chaff clouds. A single human fighter craft slipped through the interference on a ballistic trajectory. Powered down and virtually invisible, The fighter carried a payload of kinetic penetrators. Simple tungsten rods with no propulsion or guidance systems, they did not need sophistication when delivered with such precision. The rods punched through the depot's shields, which were designed to stop energy weapons and guided missiles. Not unpowered projectiles traveling at orbital velocities, the depot's fuel storage exploded spectacularly. And secondary detonations consumed the ammunition reserves. The entire facility was reduced to expanding debris in less than 90-second scan for survivors. Rodriguez ordered and prepare recovery boats. Any Vryn personnel who survived will be rescued and treated. Sirth watched as human rescue teams pulled 7 Vryn survivors from the wreckage, providing immediate medical care and comfortable detention. Why rescue them? Sirth asked Rodriguez later. You could have simply destroyed the depot and left. Rodriguez looked at him, as if the question itself was strange, because they are defeated combatants who pose no further threat. She said, we have no reason to kill them. But you lied to them about when you would attack. Sirth pointed out, you violated the protocols of engagement announcement. We gave them warning. Rodriguez countered, just not accurate warning in human warfare. Deception is a standard tactic. We call it misdirection or psychological operations. The goal is to win with minimal casualties on both sides. Over the following weeks, Sirth witnessed dozens of similar engagements. Human forces never fought the way galactic conventions dictated. They used camouflage, ambush, and misdirection constantly. They struck at supply lines rather than military forces, creating logistical nightmares that forced Vryn fleets to withdraw from forward positions, that hacked communication networks and broadcast false orders, sending Vryn units into traps or causing them to retreat from battles they could have won. They even composed what they called propaganda transmissions, designed specifically to demoralize Vryn forces and civilian populations. Earth watched recordings of human broadcasts showing Vryn defeats set to mocking music. Read transcripts of messages sent to Vryn commanders, detailing exactly how they had been outmaneuvered and suggesting that they surrender before more of their soldiers died. Most disturbing of all were the captured Vryn officers in civilized warfare. Prisoners were held until the conflict ended, then exchanged or released based on negotiated terms. The humans did something entirely different. They held captured Vryn officers for approximately 1 week, during which time they were well fed, medically examined, and treated with professional courtesy. Then they were released, given a small ship, and sent back to Vryn space. But they were not released alone. Each officer carried with them detailed recordings of their defeat, high-resolution footage of their ships being destroyed or disabled, and comprehensive after-action reports written by human analysts, explaining exactly what tactical errors had led to their capture. Why do you do this? Sirth asked Captain Rodriguez after witnessing the 3rd such release. Why humiliate them and send them home? Because a dead officer is a casualty statistic, Rodriguez explained. A defeated and humiliated officer is a living reminder that fighting humans is futile. They return to their people. They tell their stories, and other Vryn commanders think twice before engaging us. We are not trying to kill every Vryn. Observer Sirth, we are trying to break their will to fight. Sirth compiled his reports with growing concern. The humans were not violating the letter of galactic law. They had invoked Article 7 and were conducting unrestricted warfare as permitted, but the spirit of everything the Council had built, the idea that warfare could be civilized and limited, was being systematically dismantled in 3 other species. Longtime rivals of humanity or opportunists seeing weakness formally declared war on Earth. The Vexian Compact, the Korvathi Union, and the Zune Collective all entered the conflict, their combined fleets outnumbering human forces by a factor of 4 to 1 galactic. Observers waited to see if humanity would finally be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Instead, they witnessed the full scope of human military doctrine. The humans did not try to fight for enemies. Simultaneously, they divided their enemies, exploiting old grievances and territorial disputes between the Vexian Compact and Zune Collective to ensure those 2 forces could not coordinate effectively. They offered the Korvathi Union favorable trade terms to delay their full military commitment, and while their enemies were politically and strategically divided, Human forces struck with unprecedented coordinations, received reports from other observers that defied belief. Human ships that had been catalogued as merchant vessels for decades suddenly revealed hidden weapons. Automated cargo haulers transformed into missile platforms. Even human diplomatic stations were discovered to have military-grade sensors and communication arrays hidden within their structures. They have been preparing for this since before they joined the Council. Sirth transmitted in his classified report to the Quilithi government, every human presence in galactic space has dual purpose. Their merchant fleet is a reserve navy. Their civilians are trained in damage control and evacuation procedures. Their entire society appears structured to support total war if necessary. He paused, reviewing the data one more time before adding his final assessment. Humanity did not learn warfare from the galaxy. He wrote, they brought it with them, perfected over thousands of years of fighting themselves. The Vexian Compact had entered the war against humanity with confidence born of 4,000 years of military supremacy. Their fleet was the second largest in the galaxy. Their soldiers were trained in combat from youth, and their industrial capacity could replace losses faster than most species could inflict them. High Coordinator Zelkith believed the humans would be crushed within 6 months. The Dexian campaign began with overwhelming force. 300 warships advancing into human territory along a broad front. They followed proper protocols, announcing their intentions and allowing human civilian vessels to flee before engaging military targets. The human response seemed disorganized at first. Small groups of ships harassing Dexian supply lines but avoiding major fleet engagements. Elkith interpreted this as weakness, as human forces conserving strength in the face of inevitable defeat. He was spectacularly wrong. The first indication that something was amiss came when Nexian agricultural worlds began reporting crop failures, not from disease or natural causes, but from deliberate contamination. Human special operations teams had infiltrated Dexian farming colonies and introduced modified organisms into the food supply. Organisms that made crops inedible to the Exian biology but left them visually unchanged. The contamination was not lethal. It simply made it impossible for the Exians to digest their own food within weeks. 3 major agricultural worlds were producing millions of tons of useless grain that looked perfect but provided zero nutrition. They are poisoning our food supply. Zelkith's agricultural minister reported in horror, not to kill us, but to force us to divert resources to feeding our population. So then the human attacks on infrastructure began, not on military targets, but on the civilian factories that produced everything from clothing to construction materials. Human strikes were surgical and precise, destroying manufacturing equipment while leaving the buildings themselves mostly intact. They targeted water purification systems, power generation facilities, and transportation networks. Suddenly, Dexian worlds that had never seen combat found themselves struggling with basic resource distribution. Refugees began fleeing the affected worlds, not because of military threat, but because basic services had collapsed, and those refugees overwhelmed the logistics of worlds that tried to absorb them. This is not warfare, Zelkith protested in an emergency transmission to the Galactic Council. This is systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure. The humans are not fighting our military. They are attacking our entire society. Ambassador Victoria Chen responded during the next council session, her expression showing no sympathy. We are attacking your capacity to wage war, she said simply. Your civilian infrastructure supports your military factories that make clothing also make uniforms. Food that feeds civilians also feeds soldiers. We are not targeting non-combatants. We are targeting the systems that enable your war machine if you wish to avoid further damage. Withdraw your forces and surrender. The Vexian military tried to adapt, pulling ships from the front lines to protect infrastructure worlds. That was exactly what the humans wanted. With Vexian forces divided between offensive operations and defensive duties, human fleet elements that had been avoiding engagement suddenly struck hard at weakened Vexian positions. The battles were brutal and one-sided. Human ships deployed weapons that galactic observers had never seen before, missiles that split into hundreds of submunitions. each capable of tracking individual target synergy weapons that operated on frequencies specifically calculated to overload Dexian shield technology, and strangest of all, biological agents, not diseases or poisons, but compounds that cause temporary but severe physiological effects. In Dexian Biologic Sixian, soldiers found themselves incapacitated by substances that made them sleep for days, or caused uncontrollable muscle spasms, or induced severe nausea. Of it was lethal. But all of it was effective captured. Dexian crews would recover completely within a week, only to be released back to their own forces, with the same humiliating documentation that Vrin officers had received. They are following the letter of galactic law, one council observer reported. The biological agents are classified as incapacitating rather than lethal, but the effect is devastating. Vexian military units are surrendering rather than risk exposure to weapons that will leave them helpless but alive. Zelkith watched as his military forces, once the pride of the compact, were systematically dismantled, not through glorious battle, not through honorable defeat, but through a campaign designed specifically to make continuing the war impossible. Human strategy was becoming clear. They did not seek to destroy their enemies. They sought to make the cost of fighting unbearable 6 months into the Vexian campaign. Industrial output had fallen by 60%. Refugee populations, numbered in the billions. Military morale had collapsed, as soldiers questioned whether they were defending their people or simply prolonging their suffering. Zelkith called for an emergency session of the Vexian Council, the governing body of the compact. We must sue for peace. He told the assembled leaders, the humans are not fighting a war we can win. They are not even fighting a war we understand. High Minister Corvan, leader of the military faction, disagreed. We still outnumber them. He insisted our fleet is larger. Our industrial base, even damaged, exceeds theirs. We simply need to match their ruthlessness, then do so. Zelkith said quietly. Order our forces to abandon civilized warfare protocols, strike at human civilians, destroy their infrastructure, employ whatever weapons are necessary. Corvan straightened, clearly prepared to do exactly that. Then Zelkith played a recording that human intelligence had helpfully provided to him. Through back channels, it showed a human military facility that the Vexians had not known existed, massive underground complexes filled with weapons that had never been deployed, biological agents far more devastating than anything used so far, kinetic weapons that could crack planetary crust, sand, antimatter devices, carefully stored and maintained, each one capable of sterilizing an entire world. A human officer appeared in the recording, speaking directly to the camera. This message is for the Vexian compact leadership. The officer said, you are currently debating whether to escalate this conflict, whether to target human civilian populations in retaliation for our infrastructure attacks. We encourage you to think very carefully about that decision. Everything we have used against you so far represents a tiny fraction of human military capability. We have been restraining ourselves because our goal is your surrender. Not your extinction, but if you choose to target human civilians, if you choose to make this a war of annihilation, we will accommodate that choice, and you will lose, not eventually. Not through attrition, but quickly and absolutely. We have weapons we have never deployed, tactics we have never revealed, and reserves you cannot imagine. Choose peace. High Coordinator Zelkith, choose survival. The recording ended. The Vexian council chamber was silent. How did they know we were having this discussion? Corvan finally asked, how did they know what we would debate? Zelkith had been asking himself the same question, and the answer was terrifying, because they understand us better than we understand ourselves. He said they have been studying us, analyzing our psychology and our decision-making processes. They predicted this moment and prepared for it. He stood, his decision made. I am ordering the immediate withdrawal of all Vexian forces from human territory. He announced furthermore, I am proposing that we seek terms of surrender before the humans demonstrate any more of their capabilities. Corvan started to object, then looked at the frozen image of the human weapons facility on the display. How can they have all of this and never used it? He asked, how can they possess such power and choose restraint? Because, Zelkith said, They are trying to teach us a lesson. They want the galaxy to understand that human restraint is a choice. Not a weakness that they could destroy us utterly, but prefer not to. He gestured to the display, and they want us to be grateful for that restraint. To fear what would happen if they ever decided to remove it within days? The Dexian Compact formally requested peace negotiations. The Corvathi Union, watching what had happened to the Dexians, quickly followed suit. The Zune Collective, more stubborn, lasted another 3 weeks before human forces demonstrated a new weapon system that caused entire Zune battle groups to simply power down. Their electronics systematically disabled by some form of electromagnetic attack that no one could counter. Only the Vrin sovereignty remained in active combat, more from pride than from any realistic hope of victory, but even they were approaching their breaking point. General Marcus Webb of the United Nations Space Force was summoned to appear before the Galactic Council to answer questions about human conduct during the war. He arrived in full dress uniform. Medals from conflicts the galaxy had never known about displayed across his chest. High Counselor Mithras confronted him immediately. General Webb, the Council has reviewed reports of human military actions over the past year. She said your forces have employed weapons and tactics that, while technically legal under Article 7, violate every principle of civilized warfare we have established. 18 months after the war began, Ambassador Victoria Chen stood once again before the Galactic Council. The chamber looked the same crystalline walls and floating platforms, but everything else had changed. Delegates who had once dismissed humanity now watched her with expressions ranging from wary respect to barely concealed fear. The Vrin sovereignty had formally surrendered 3 days earlier. The last of humanity's enemies to capitulate, their military forces had been reduced by 68%, not through massive battles, but through a systematic campaign of attrition and demoralization that had broken their will to fight. Chen carried no notes, no display materials. She did not need them. Honored council members, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I come before you today to present the terms of peace between the United Nations of Earth and the 4 powers that declared war upon us. These terms have been accepted by all parties and require only council ratification to become binding. High Counselor Mithras gestured for her to continue, though her crystalline face showed none of the warmth it once had. First, full reparations, Chen stated. The Vrin sovereignty, Dexian Compact, Corvathi Union, and Zune Collective will compensate Earth for all damages incurred during the conflict. Payment schedules have been established based on each power's economic capacity. Second, demilitarized zones will be established along all borders between human territory and the territories of the 4 powers. These zones will extend 100 light-years in all directions and will be monitored by neutral council observers. Third, and most significantly, we propose a complete restructuring of galactic warfare conventions. The chamber erupted immediately. Counselor Verith of the Vrin, present despite his diminished position, rose to his feet. Restructuring. He demanded the conventions of civilized warfare have maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years. Humanity cannot simply dictate changes because you won one. Conflict. Chen turned to face him directly. One conflict that demonstrated conclusively that your conventions are meaningless against any species willing to ignore them. She replied, your civilized warfare only works when all parties agree to be civilized. The moment one side decides to pursue total victory, your rules become suicide pacts for those who follow them. She turned back to address the full council. Humanity proposes that the old protocols be abolished entirely. Chen continued, if warfare occurs between council members, it will be unrestricted, total, and conducted with every available resource. No more announced fleet movements. No more casualty thresholds. No more prohibited weapons. War will be exactly what it has always been for humanity. The complete commitment of a society to defeating its enemies. The goal is not to make war civilized, she explained into the shocked silence. The goal is to make war so horrifying that no species will dare start. One. Mithras stood, her voice tight with controlled anger. You would turn the galaxy into a powder keg. She said you would ensure that every conflict becomes a war of annihilation? No. Chen corrected, we would ensure that species think very carefully before starting conflicts at all. Your old system encouraged warfare because the costs were limited and predictable. Our system makes the cost of war potentially unlimited. That will serve as a far better deterrent, Counselor Yavuk of the Keltorian Federation, a species that had remained neutral throughout the conflict, spoke up, and if the Council refuses these terms, he asked, what then, Ambassador? Will humanity wage war on the entire galaxy? Chen smiled slightly. No, Counselor Yavuk, she said, if the Council refuses. We will simply demonstrate why acceptance is in your best interest. She activated the chamber's holographic display. And images filled the space above the assembled delegate ships appeared, hundreds of them. All broadcasting human identification codes, these vessels are currently positioned in orbit around every Council homeworld. Chen said calmly, they are unarmed merchant ships. Scientific vessels and diplomatic couriers, they have been in those positions for years. Visiting your worlds, conducting trade, performing research, we could have you confirm their positions right now, if you wish. She paused. Letting that information sink in now, let me show you what those ships actually are. The display shifted, showing the internal structure of the vessel's hidden weapons bays, concealed sensor arrays, and military-grade systems filled every ship, every human civilian vessel in galactic space is also a military asset. Chen explained every merchant captain has military training. Every scientific station can serve as a forward operating base. We have been preparing for this possibility since the day we joined the Council. The implications were staggering. Hundreds of human vessels, trusted and welcomed across the galaxy. We're actually an invasion force hiding in plain sight. You have been spying on us, Mithras said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage, infiltrating our worlds, preparing for war while pretending to be peaceful traders. We have been protecting our interests while hoping we would never need to use these assets, Chen corrected, but yes. We have been thorough. We know the location of every military installation in Council space. We have mapped your communication networks, analyzed your tactical doctrines, and identified critical infrastructure on every major world if we wanted to. We could cripple the entire Council within hours. She let that hang in the air before continuing, but we do not want to. She said, we want to be your allies, your trading partners, your friends. We want the galaxy to prosper in peace, however. We will not return to a situation where our compliance with your rules is mistaken for weakness. We will not allow our restraint to be seen as inability. Subverserth, present in his capacity as a Council representative, stood to address both Chen and the assembled delegates. Ambassador Chen, I have spent the past year observing human military operations, he said. I have seen your weapons, your tactics, and your capabilities, and I have read the intelligence reports suggesting that everything I witnessed represents only a fraction of human military potential. Is that true? Chen met his eyes. Yes. Observer Sirth, she said, simply everything you saw, every weapon we deployed, every tactic we employed, all of it comes from human history and technology that is decades or centuries old by our standards. We have developed far more advanced systems, but we chose not to deploy them because they were unnecessary. The galaxy surrendered before we needed to reveal the full extent of what we can do. She turned back to the Council. This is the reality you must accept, she said. Humanity has the capacity to wage war at a level beyond your comprehension. We have chosen not to use that capacity. But that choice depends on the galaxy making the wise decision to never threaten us again. The restructuring of warfare conventions is not a punishment. It is an educational opportunity. You will learn, as we did over thousands of years of fighting ourselves, that the best way to prevent war is to make it too terrible to contemplate. Counselor Yavuk spoke again, his voice thoughtful. You spoke of mutually assured destruction. He said the concept that if war becomes devastating enough, no rational actor will start one. Yes. Chen confirmed, but that doctrine assumes rational actors. Yavuk continued, what happens when irrational species arise? What happens when someone decides that annihilation is preferable to peace? Chen nodded, acknowledging the legitimate concern. Then the galaxy will have human allies who specialize in warfare. She She said, "We will defend council members against existential threats. That is part of our proposal. Humanity becomes the military arm of the council. The species that others call when diplomacy fails and survival is at stake, we will be your sword, but only when absolutely necessary in exchange. You will recognize that human restraint is a gift, not a weakness, and you will never again make the mistake the Vryn made." The council debated for 3 days. Representatives argued about sovereignty, about military independence, about the wisdom of allowing one species to hold such power, but underlying every argument was fear of what would happen if they refused. Fear of the weapons humanity had not yet revealed, fear of the ships orbiting their homeworlds and the capabilities hidden within them in the end. The vote was unanimous. The old conventions of civilized warfare were abolished, new protocols were established, making any warfare between council members unrestricted and total, and humanity was formally designated as the council's primary military force, to be called upon only in cases of existential threat. As the council adjourned, Observer Sirth approached Ambassador Chen in the corridor outside the chamber. "You have brought your human concept of mutually assured destruction to the stars," he said quietly. "You have made the galaxy fear war again." Chen nodded yes, she said, "because fear is a better deterrent than rules. Rules only work when people choose to follow them. Fear works whether you want it to or not. But you did not have to do this," Sirth continued. "You could have simply defeated your enemies and maintained the old system. Why force this change on everyone?" Chen looked at him thoughtfully. "Because the old system was a lie," she said. "It pretended that warfare could be civilized, that violence could be controlled and limited, but that only worked because no one had truly tested it. The Vryn tested it. It failed immediately.